We are live. Welcome to the most liberal show on X, the Liberal Discourses. I'm your host, Josh for Canada. It's Sunday, December 29th, 2024. We are broadcasting live from the Golden Horseshoe Studio right here in Ontario, Canada. Good afternoon, good evening, and in the morning, wherever you are, I welcome you in to another Liberal Discourse. Today's episode is titled 1937, Ireland's Manifest Destiny. The early origins of this phrase, manifest destiny, are found in the United States of America. The earliest known use of the phrase is attributed to Andrew Jackson. In 1824, Jackson described the United States as a country manifestly called by the Almighty to a destiny which Greece and Rome, in the days of their pride, might have envied. Manifest destiny evolved to become an American doctrine that it was the duty of the United States to expand to the Pacific coast and beyond. So if in America, manifest destiny is the expansion to the Pacific, what then is the manifest destiny of a country such as Ireland? And has Ireland achieved this destiny? Maybe destiny was made manifest in 1937, 87 years ago, when Ireland adopted a new constitution called the Bunrock. Article 5 of the Bunrock may provide the answer to this manifest destiny question. Article 5 states, Ireland is a sovereign, independent, democratic state. Article 5.2, the state is named Éire, or in the English language, Ireland. Is or was Ireland a sovereign, independent, democratic state? Let us consider for a moment that the Bunrock was signed on July 1st, 1937. On that day, Éire was a sovereign, independent, democratic state. When World War II broke out in 1939, Éire exercised its newfound autonomy, and Éire remained neutral throughout the war. Fast forward to May 13th, 1945, and Winston Churchill is delivering a speech declaring victory in Europe. In his speech, Churchill made specific comments regarding Ireland's neutrality. Here's a quote. Owing to the action of Mr. de Valera, so much at variance with the temper and instinct of thousands of Southern Irishmen who hastened to the battlefront to prove their ancient valor, the approaches which the Southern Irish ports and airfields could so easily have guarded were closed by hostile aircraft and U-boats. This was indeed a deadly moment in our life, and if it had not been for the loyalty and friendship of Northern Ireland, we should have been forced to come to close quarters with Mr. de Valera or perish forever from the earth. However, with restraint and poise to which history will find few parallels, His Majesty's government never laid a violent hand upon them, though at times it would have been quite easy and quite natural. And we left the de Valera government to frolic with the German and later with the Japanese representatives to their heart's content. 3 days later, on May 16th, 1945, Eamon de Valera responded to Churchill's comments on public radio. This speech was recorded, and I will now play part of de Valera's speech that, in my opinion, raises questions as to whether Éire is or ever was a sovereign, independent, democratic state. One moment. I do not think that is going to work. I made an attempt. We will work on the technological aspect of this here production moving forward. Give me one moment and I will read verbatim the speech. I anticipated that this was going to happen. So, okay. This is what de Valera said in response to Churchill. He posed a hypothetical question. And he said, quote, suppose Germany had won the war, had invaded and occupied England, and that after a long lapse of time and many bitter struggles, Germany was finally brought to acquiesce in admitting England's right to freedom and let England go. But not the whole of England, all but, let us say, the 6 southern counties. These 6 southern counties, those, let us suppose, commanding the entrance to the narrow seas, Germany had singled out and insisted on holding herself with a view to weakening England as a whole and maintaining the securing of Germany's communications through the Straits of Dover. Let us suppose further that after all this had happened, Germany was engaged in a great war in which she could show that she was on the side of freedom of a number of small nations. Would Mr. Churchill, as an Englishman who believed that his own nation had as good a right to freedom as any other, not freedom for a part merely, but freedom for the whole, would he, whilst Germany still maintained the partition of his country and occupied 6 counties of it, would he lead this partitioned England to join with Germany in a crusade? Would he think the people of partitioned England an object of shame if they stood neutral in such circumstances? Could he not find in his heart the generosity to acknowledge that there is a small nation that stood alone not for 1 year or 2, but for several hundred years against aggression, that endured spoliations, famines, massacres in endless succession, that was clubbed many times into insensibility, but that each time, on returning consciousness, took up the fight anew, a small nation that could never be got to accept defeat and has never surrendered her soul? Mr. Churchill is justly proud of his nation's perseverance against heavy odds, but we in this island are still prouder of our people's perseverance for freedom through all the centuries. We of our time have played our part in the perseverance, and we have pledged ourselves to the dead generations who have preserved intact for us this glorious heritage, that we too will strive to be faithful to the end and pass on this tradition unblemished. End quote. Our guest this evening is Mark Anthony. Mr. Anthony is a native man from the Irish Constitutional Republic of Éire. He's a land protector, constitutional analyst, and a political activist. Mr. Anthony is the co-creator of the website bunrock1937.ie, Irish law for Irish people. And Mark is a believer that our divine Lord Jesus Christ is King of all kings. Mark, thank you so much for joining the Liberal Discourses this evening. My introductory question for you, Mark. What is Ireland's manifest destiny? Has it been fulfilled? And I'm curious, Mark, does Ulster, the existence of Ulster, serve as a proof that Éire is not a sovereign, independent, democratic state?
Hello, how are you all? Josh, I just want to begin with thanking you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And just to remind people, today is the 29th of December, 2024. 87 years ago today, the Irish Constitution, Bunrock na Hern, and Bunrock, the Constitution, came into operation and has remained the full canopy of law ever since. But you were correct. on the 2nd of September 1939, Ireland, or Éire, as it was officially named in Article 4, the preamble of the Constitution. So we were thrust into an emergency across the world. And all governments would have been called in under emergency pretense, just like they would have been in 2020, to initiate emergency powers. And by the initiation of emergency powers, it makes it possible for both houses to suspend the Constitution and change it even in accordance with law. And that's the situation of which we, on this entire island, have been in since the 3rd of September 1939. The First Amendment of the Constitution was ultra vires. I'm going to read you a little bit here now from a book. It's an official book. And it is comprising period from the 5th of July 1939 to the 25th of October 1939. Seanad Éire, the upper house, okay? And they were all called in under emergency, and they put this bill forward, the First Amendment. First Amendment of the Constitution, Bill 1939, second stage. The Taoiseach, a Corlia. The Taoiseach is the so-called Prime Minister or Chieftain, which it translates into. This amendment is required to resolve a doubt which has arisen as to whether under Article 28 of the Constitution, a time of war means at any time except one in which the state is actually participating as a belligerent. My view was that a time of war, as defined in the Constitution, covered an emergency of this sort. An emergency such as we are facing now. However, if we get from the Oireachtas the powers that are sought in the bills that are now put before you, it would do no doubt at any time the possibility of legal action being taken, questioning the validity of any orders that may be issued on the grounds that such powers were not contemplated at the time of the enactment of the Constitution, and that therefore any act that might be taken would be ultra vires. Ultra vires is a Latin term for illegal, practically, would be ultra vires, and that the powers we seek would also be ultra vires. To remove that doubt, we want to include in the phrase time of war a time of when an armed conflict is taking place, which armed conflict might menace the vital interests of the state. It has been suggested in the Dáil, and may be suggested in the Seanad, that the moment you leave it to a majority of both houses of the Oireachtas to determine when a time of emergency of this sort exists, you make it possible for a majority of both houses of the Oireachtas to suspend the Constitution, and that therefore there is nothing to prevent an unscrupulous party with a majority in both houses. Well, we had an unscrupulous party governing from 2020. It was what you would know as a coalition government, and it was made up of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, who are sworn enemies, and the Green Party. And they have came together and suspended the Constitution. So changing it, right, and therefore there is nothing to prevent an unscrupulous party with a majority in both houses from changing the Constitution, even in accordance with law. Well, they tried that on the 8th of March. when they tried to remove the natural law aspect out of the Constitution, were the word woman, Article 41.1 of the Constitution. And they were trying to replace the word woman and her, mother, with cures or other durable relationships. That will have serious implications going forward for this country. The country came out and voted on the 8th of March. 73% voted it down. The government was hurt and ran off to Washington, D.C. Leo Varadkar came back and resigned his position. Simon Coveney has not taken up his position again. The government sort of fell apart. Apart from national times, or apart from normal times, I think it must be recognised that in certain times of emergency, it is essential for the services of the state that the executive should be furnished with ample powers to face any contingency that might arise. I notice that an amendment has been suggested which further tries to define a time of armed conflict as a time when a member of the British Commonwealth of Nations would be engaged in war. Well, you look at the UK at the minute, they're engaged in a war in the far east of Europe with the Ukraine, they're facilitating it. I do not think, however, that it would cover possible emergencies. One can visualize a case which, let us say, Canada might be at war, so replace Canada with the USA. Canada might be at war, defending her own interests in the east, right? So they're defending Israel. Such a war might menace our vital interests, even if Great Britain were engaged in a European war. Well, they are. This is just a rerun of 1939, people. We're engaged in a European war that might not menace or necessarily affect our vital interests. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't. But they're now putting our neutrality and all at risk, our sovereignty and all at risk, and engaging with the United Nations and NATO and things like that, you know. And that's unconstitutional. But they're only doing that to an emergency. Why? Because Article 24 of the Constitution states that they can do that. So we have remained in a perpetual state of emergency ever since that enactment, because every time it went to run out, there was some sort of crisis or emergency, which they kept a wee slight part of that opened. So 2020, fast forward to 2020, 1974, you had the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. That extended the emergency powers, 1976 emergency powers. And within that there, they left a clause that they could perpetually extend it. And they've done so. You had 1998 up in the north here, the Omagh bomb, that extended it. Last year, up in Omagh again, you had a chief inspector of the PSNI. Well, there was an assassination attempt on his life. And Helen McEntee, on the 25th, she's the Justice Minister of the so-called Ireland, Government of Ireland. She went into the Dáil and used that excuse to extend the emergency powers bill for 1 year, being so that would get them to the end of their term, with the option to extend it to 2030. Now, Mary McGrath came out and told the people about this. I have the minutes of the Dáil where she's standing up talking about it. This is how the government has removed the people's so-called sovereign rights. They're doing it for the common good, public emergency, public interest. They're doing it all for that there. And they are manufacturing it. So they're manufacturing the crisis, the housing crisis, the immigration crisis. They're manufacturing it to create an emergency to have the excuse to extend the powers of Article 24. Article 24 of the Constitution states, if and whenever on passage by Dáil of any bill other than a bill expressed to be containing a proposal to amend the Constitution, the Taoiseach certifies by message in writing addressed to the President and to the Chairman of each House of the Oireachtas that in the opinion of the government, the bill is urgent and immediately necessary for the preservation of public peace and security, or by reason of the existence of a public emergency, whether domestic or international. The time of the consideration of such bill by Seanad shall, if Dáil so resolves, and if the President, after consultation with the Councils of State, concurs, be abridged with Article 28.3.3, which is a time of war. But in 1939, the First Amendment, they done an artificially extended meaning. And that only exists in any blue book from the 25th day of March, 1942. And that has been continuous ever since. The only problem is, Article 8.1 of the Irish Constitution, in the Irish text, the Irish language text, Clogéileach, it states Irish as the first national, official, principal language. Article 8.2, Sax Burla tongue is only accepted as a second official language. That reads completely different to what is written in the English text on the left-hand side. You go to Article 63 of the Constitution, which was one of the omitted articles in the First Amendment and the Second Amendment of the Constitution. That was one of the omitted articles. There was 13 articles omitted, Articles 51 to 63 inclusive. But they continue to have the full force of law. And Article 63 pairs up with Article 8.1 of the Constitution as the Irish language text. And 63 states, a copy of this Constitution shall be signed by the Taoiseach, the Chief Justice, the Chairman of Dáil, and shall be enrolled in the office of the Registrar of the Supreme Court. And such signed copy will be conclusive evidence of the provisions of this Constitution in case of conflict between the Irish and English texts. The Irish texts will take supremacy. The problem is, since 1941, 41, they changed the Second Amendment of the Constitution, the 30th of May, 1941. They changed the text within the Constitution to a standardized Irish text. It's not an Irish text. It's a Roman font. It's called Clo-Romanic. It's called Clo-Romanic. It is an English font, a Roman font. It is written in an English text. The Irish Clogéileach is in ancient Latin. It's one of the oldest written and spoken languages still in existence on Earth today. The language is our heritage. There's three things that you need to have a national written constitution. One is an indigenous people. We are that. We are a Christian people. And that is explicitly stated. Protestant, Catholic, agnostic, whatever, but Christian. This is a Christian island. That is not my opinion. That's a fact in law. And what's happening here is multiculturalism is being entrusted upon the island of Éire, north and south. The north is Northern Ireland. It is an act. It is what is known as a state-let. And every state-let would have a management assets team. Well, that is the Stormont institutions. Then you go to Leinster House, and they are under the Republic of Ireland Act 1948. Where is the Republic of Ireland? The Irish Republic was proclaimed on the Easter Monday, 1916, 24th of April 1916, on the steps of the GPO by Pádraig Pearse. 1918, Sinn Féin then had an all-island election. All-island election, first one after the Second or First World War. And they set up the first Dáil, the first Dáil. And within it, they had a constitution. And that was point 4. I have the original constitution. It's here in front of me. And the book states on the front of it, and David Wayne Miller owned the book. So his name's on the front of it. D.W. Miller. David Wayne Miller. Minutes of proceedings of the first Parliament, 1919 to 1921, official record. And within it, there's in section 4, it's called Bun Rock Dalla Éireann. That is the 1919 Constitution. It comprises of 5 or 6 articles. And it states in it that this is a provisional constitution until such time that the people give themselves a written constitution. The people give themselves a written constitution, written in the national official language text, which had been widely used and for over 2.5 millennia. And we changed our constitution and give the people a working definition of the rule of law. It is not the rule of law. The rule of law, they are working off, they are different versions of a constitution. The constitution is enrolled in the Supreme Court, and as you've heard there, as conclusive evidence. But they've kept us in that perpetual state of war. And I'm going to read you out of the Irish Constitution, J.M. Kelly, 3rd edition, page 270, I think it is. And it refers to the First Amendment of the Constitution and the validity of it. So listen very carefully. It says amendment of the Constitution in one language only. Why? Because the first amendment was only done in English only. And Irish takes supremacy, Irish text. So how can you refer upon the Irish text if there's ever any conflict, if it was only ever written in one language? And it was only ever known as what is an artificially extended meaning. And you will hear it in this. And this is, so it says, a potentially far more serious matter arises in connection with Article 28.3.3. The First Amendment of the Constitution Act, passed on the day after the German invasion of Poland in 1939, gave to the expression time of war an artificially extended meaning, and was regarded as the root of the immunity of the 1939 to the 1946 emergency legislation from challenge. It is equally seen as part of the armour of the 1976 Emergency Powers Act. The bill for this amendment of the Constitution Act was passed in English only and purported to alter only the English version of 28.3.3. Accordingly, in the period after the enactment of this amendment, there was a patent conflict between the Irish and English version of 28.3.3. inasmuch as the Irish version contained no reference to the artificially extended meaning time of war in applying 25.5.4 to this situation, therefore, and allowing the Irish version to prevail. That extended meaning not ought to have been allowed to operate. The Second Amendment of the Constitution Act 1941 was bilingual itself and contained parallel bilingual amendments, except for this part of 28.3.3, where it purported merely to supply the Irish amendment previously missing. It remains, however, a question whether a bilingual text can be effectively amended anyway by purported amendment which is unilingual, being one language. And if on that ground the purported 1939 amendment was ineffective, the purported 1941 supplementary amendment was equally so. Nobody ever challenged it ever going forward, and we remained in that. So we've remained in that perpetual state of war. And 28.3.3, if you look at, you can go into the website, people, if you're stuck, www.bunreacht, BUNREACHT, 1937.ie. And there's a copy of the original Constitution with the enactment date. None of the blue books have an enactment date, and I can categorically tell you here now that on the front page of that book that was brought into operations 87 years ago today, the Irish text is the only text that is grammatically on that page. Why? Well, Constitution of Ireland is written in all caps, and there's brackets on it. I'm going by the Chicago Manual of Styles. That is a foreign language, and using brackets and braces removes it off the page. So bun means primary in Irish, racht means law, na means off, hearn, right? Off and belonging to Éire. That's what's on it. Then you have, in brackets again, enacted by the people on the 1st of July 1937. That removes that of the page. Down below that, in operation, as in from the 29th of December 1937. That removes that of the page. Then you have Baile Atlee. That is Dublin. And that's written in all caps and underneath, Dublin. And then you have published by the Stationery Office. That's in all caps too. So grammatically speaking, and going by the writers, editors, and publishers' choices of how to write manuscripts, that is a foreign text and only used by the deaf, illiterate, and dumb people of the world. It is a signed language. Someone signs it, then it is translated into whatever language, and then relayed back to another. It takes 3 people. We have been systematically enslaved by the text of the Constitution that is enforced today, the version that's in today, a blue copy, a royal blue copy, with a harp on it. If you look down at the bottom left-hand corner of the royal standard for the Crown of England, that harp is on it with a royal blue background. Way back before we got our independence from England, back off them, they called us Ireland, the Kingdom of Ireland and Great Britain. They have all the patent rights to Ireland and anything to do with Ireland. So the government of Ireland the Constitution of Ireland, the Government of Ireland Act 1920, where Freemasons have special provisions, Article 65, special provisions to do whatever they want, to rule for the king. So yes, we did get independence. The name of the state is Éire, but that independence was short-lived. 1 year, 9 months, and 2 days to be precise. And that constitution was removed. Then we were thrusted into an emergency of a war, world war, and the war, we remain neutral. But we changed the constitution through propaganda, fake propaganda, and whatever. And it has remained that there ever since. And everybody is going in under Admiralty Maritime Law, which is military courts. And that's why nobody can seek true justice, true social justice on this island. Why? Because they are operating out of a de facto constitution. Now, I'll read you out of just a section out of a 1961 book by J.M. Kelly. This book has been removed. I handed it into a senior council barrister for this island. And they opened it up and says, "Is this what I actually think it is?" And I says, "Aye." And they says, "I've never ever seen one of these. I've never let alone hold one." It is called Fundamental Rights in the Irish Law and Constitution. There's two jurisdictions in the Irish law and Constitution. J.M. Kelly. And in the forward page at the bottom of it, it says, "Therefore, the question whether the destiny of the Irish Constitution, not the Constitution of Ireland, the Irish Constitution, to be more than a piece of paper depends not only on the nobility of its contents, but the watchfulness of the Irish people." The second edition of that came out in 1967. I also have an original copy of that. And at the front of it, when you open it up, it says, "The first edition of this book, when it appeared in 1961, at once became the standard work on its subject, and has since that date earned a high reputation both in the legal professions and the university law schools of Ireland and abroad. The central topic of this book is fundamental rights, is treated with such generous depth of background and such spread of material from neighbouring areas that the work, as generally recognised, does not fall short of being a commentary on the entire field of Irish constitutional law." The second edition, of which I'm reading from, which is more than 1/3 longer than the first, contains extensive rearrangement as well as concise and adequate treatment of many important constitutional decisions of the Irish court since 1961. On page 23 of that, it says, "The Constitution of 1937 represents a fresh start in respect of fundamental principles that are to be a guide of this country for the future. And I do not think a further constitution, an unwritten one, was intended by the people of Éire, not Ireland, Éire, to exist side by side with this written constitution, or even, perhaps it would even be more correct to say, outside and beyond the present constitution." The only thing I've been trying to do, Josh, is tell the people of this island that what the state is purporting to them to be the rule of law is a facade. And it only has power by consent because people go along with it. But when people go into courts and try and use it, they find that they get cut down and put out. So therefore they come out and they say, "That constitution is no good. R.I.P. Amban Rector, R.I.P." That's incorrect to say that. Why? Because ignorance of law is no excuse, maxim of law. So if you don't know who, what, and where you are, I'm an Irish national. I live in the Irish Republic. We named her Éire. That's constitutional fact and law. It's enrolled in the Supreme Court, which is the highest and most important court, most important building on this entire island. The preamble of it states, "In the name of the most holy Trinity, from whom is all authority, and to whom our final end, all actions of men and states must be referred. We, the people of Éire." It doesn't say we, the people of Ireland. It says we, the people of Éire. Humbly acknowledging all our obligations, that's contracts, everything, all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ. There, you've established a Christian nation. And all our obligations, we don't answer to no man or state. We answer to Jesus Christ, who sustained our fathers through centuries of trial, gratefully remembering their heroic and unremitting struggle to regain the rightful independence of our nation. The rightful independence of our nation. And seeking to promote the common good. Only seeking to promote the common good, which is communitarianism. With due observance, so we must be observant of it, of prudence, of justice, and charity. So that, that's the most important words in it, so that the dignity and the freedom of the individual may be assured, true social order attained, and concord established with other nations, do hereby adopt, enact, and give to ourselves a written constitution. Freedom was never free, people. Freedom was only ever given till you, lent till you. Rights are exercisable. You keep them in your pocket and you only exercise them when you need them. You take them out when you need them. Well, we have got God-given inherent rights as natural men and women enshrined in the Irish Constitution. And since 2020, the 16th of March 2020, Leo Varadkar stood in Washington, D.C. and locked Ireland down, the 26 counties. While he was abroad, he locked Ireland down. And they initiated the emergency powers at full tilt, which give the 15 ministers of the government, especially the Justice Minister, full dictatorial control. And that's why we were all questioning the 5K rule, that you went out and you were wearing masks and all that there. All your rights, your bodily autonomy and all. Why? Because two parties came together, unscrupulous parties came together. The coalition, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green parties, came together with support from other parties and suspended the constitution for a novel virus that nobody has ever proven to exist.
I want to interrupt here for a second. Pardon me. This is fascinating. You're very well spoken. It's very dense. This is very dense, and it's somewhat of a disadvantage for yourself because I know you have all of the documents. So you can be proving everything it is that you're saying right now through the letter of the law. I want to ask about this here war. That Ireland, your contention is that Ireland has been in a perpetual state of war since 1938, correct?
1939, since the beginning of the Second World War.
And since the beginning of the Second World War, got it. So when they enacted that perpetual state of war, was there a time limit on this, or they enacted it and they never revisited it until many years later?
Yes. 1946, you see, it remained in place because we're still the world's still at war. So what De Valera was doing there was Winston Churchill and Lloyd George and people like that. They were there in 1916, and they were there in 1918, and they were there in 1921 when Dáil Éireann was founded by the Irish people, and they didn't recognize the Irish Republic. So on the 6th of December 1921, there was a delegate of plenipotentiaries. That is people, that is diplomats with full diplomatic power to sign on other people's behalfs. But they don't have to, but they have that power with them. The main man, De Valera, gave them that power. He didn't go for the simple fact was, well, you don't lock up your brains. So he sent over Arthur Griffith, Michael Collins, a few people like that. And Arthur Griffith, now I have books here, Arthur Griffith, who was the founder of Sinn Féin, was already going to sign it before he even left these shores. Now, there is discrepancies in the signatories, because if you actually go onto the government website and look up the original signatories, all of them are in black ink, and one looks like it is cut out of a piece of paper in blue ink and stuck on, which happened because there was a few of the people weren't going to sign it. And they were saying, you don't sign this here, we're going to blow you into smithereens. All right, she's been doing that this past 700 years. You starved us and everything. What next, like? So that doesn't wash for me. They signed terms for a treaty. They brought them back. And for 10 months, the delegates of Dáil Éireann were split. You had the Republicans who wanted a 32-county republic. And what they were bringing back was, what would you call it, conditional acceptance. So the north, the 6 counties, Northern Ireland. Ulster, you see, is made up of 9 counties, right? The province Ulster. But Northern Ireland is made up of 6 counties. Why? Because the Unionists at the time says if we keep the 9 counties, we won't hold on to the Northern Ireland for 50 years. So we'll bring it back into the most northern eastern counties, which would have been Belfast and all that, would have been all Unionist, bar a few nationalists who had no say, no vote, no nothing. And this was, Northern Ireland was created as a Unionist statelet within a sovereign territory called Éire. So they would have been, the government back then would have been the assets management team for the British Empire. Just look at it as a business. So you had in 1921 terms for agreement signed. 10 months it took to ratify it. Michael Collins drafted the 1922 Constitution of the Free State of Ireland. You see, there's that word again, Ireland. And it was in all caps. And how they sold it to the people was they stuck a tricolour in the front of it, so it made it look Irish. But Article 17 of it, and this is what Michael Collins gave to the people, Article 17 of it, and this is the Irish Free State. So anybody talking about the Irish Free State, the 1922 Constitution or anything like that, yous are delusional if you're calling yourself an Irish nationalist or a Republican, because you don't live in a republic. You live under a monarchy. Your subjects under a monarchy. Subjective. Okay? And Article 17 of this very Constitution, 1922, I'm reading the original here in front of me. The oath to be taken by the members of the Oireachtas shall be in the following form. I, ... do solemnly swear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the Irish Free State as by the law established, and that I will be faithful to H.M. King George V and his heirs, being every other fucking heir that has came since, right? And his heirs and the successors by law in virtue of the common citizenship of Ireland and with Great Britain. Ireland, the Kingdom of Ireland, and Great Britain, and to her adherence and membership of the group of nations forming the British Commonwealth of Nations. Such oaths shall be taken and subscribed by every member of the Oireachtas before taking their seat therein before the representatives of the Crown or some other person authorised by him. That's what they give to the people of the country, and they call themselves free and independent, and that's why people like Dan Breen and all fought against it. That's why Éamon de Valera and all stood down. It wasn't the Irish Republic that was proclaimed in 1919. And every one of them took an oath of allegiance. And I'm going to tell you the oath of allegiance here now because I'm reading the original document, people. And in 1919, they took this oath of allegiance when they set up the first Dáil. I, Mark Anthony, do solemnly swear or affirm that I do not and shall not yield a voluntary support to any pretended government, authority, or power within Ireland, hostile or immiscible thereto, and I do further swear or affirm that I, the best of my knowledge and ability, will support and defend the Irish Republic and the government of the Irish Republic, which is Dáil Éireann, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God. Every member of that Dáil, including Michael Collins, Arthur Griffith, and all them plenipotentiaries that went over there to sign that there, took an oath of allegiance to the Irish Republic. Well, if you take an oath of allegiance to something and you break that oath, that is a treasonable offence. Would you agree?
I think you're getting into some very controversial territory, with all due respect. And I'm not an expert at this at all, so let me just understand where it is you're coming from. So you had the Anglo-Irish War that ended with a truce, July 11th, 1921.
My birthday.
Then you have that's your birthday?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, interesting.
1922 it was signed.
Wow. Well, yes.
11th of July 1922, Michael Collins was shot 11 days later in the back.
Yes.
Treason.
Yes. I'm not going to be telling you anything you don't already know. Let me just put this into categories here. So you have this civil war, Anglo-Irish War, closes with the truce, July 11th. Okay. Then you have the Anglo-Irish Treaty. This is what you're speaking about right now. Okay. This was December 6, 1921. And it was highly controversial. This Anglo-Irish Treaty, highly controversial. On one side, you have Arthur Griffith. On the other side, you got de Valera. All right. Griffith, well, he sided with the treaty. Okay. And Michael Collins with Griffith, he had said that this treaty offers freedom to achieve freedom. Okay, he had said that it wasn't the best. You know, whether it made Ireland a republic or not is up for debate. But he said there was still more to go. But this is a step in the right direction. Then January 7th, 1922, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was approved by the Dáil. Okay, democracy. De Valera opposed this treaty. Then, in June of that same year, after this treaty was approved, you have a general election. You have a general election in June 1922. And guess what? The people who were in favor of the treaty won that election. They won that election. Then the next year, civil war breaks out in May 1923. And what happens? The guys who had proposed this here treaty that was accepted democratically were killed. Michael Collins killed August 22nd, 1922. And Arthur Griffith was killed a week before that, is my understanding. So then you have this William Cosgrove. So that is my understanding of that little sliver of time. Mark, would you like to comment on any of that, of which I've just laid out? That's kind of the timeline of events for the Anglo-Irish Treaty. You have put forth this document as being highly controversial, but it is the sort of bedrock that supports the Constitution that came in 1937. Would you like to comment on any of that?
Yeah, W.T. Cosgrove became the first president of Éire. He was a Protestant. I think he was maybe even a Unionist. He would have been the viceroy to the King of England, so to speak. He was the first president of Éire, but he was also the viceroy to the king under the Constitution of Ireland. 1936, the 11th of December, King Edward VIII abdicated from the Crown of England. If you watch the mini-series of The Crown, I have never watched it, but I turned on the first episode of it, and the very first episode, it's actually about King Edward VIII abdicating. The Crown became an establishment after that, a corporation, because he dismantled the Crown, and in doing so, he took all his power with him. He also took the 1922 Constitution with him. So Eamon de Valera, being an Irish Republican with an oath to the Irish Republic, and as pursuant to the Proclamation of 1916, seized that moment and struck for her freedom and brought in a written constitution, which was voted on by the people on the 1st of July 1937 by nationwide state plebiscite, and was brought into operation on the 29th, the day of December 1937.
Correct.
That is
so you
that.
had
Yeah.
you had right.